Well, yes, in acknowledging the contribution that has been made by those who spoke before us, I think important aspects have also been touched upon, elaborated, and also put into a very good context. Therefore, in this brief presentation, we will share with you some rough thoughts on the subject based on our analysis of various events over the last decades or so. These events are important to consider and link to what is unraveling today as we move yet again into an epoch of crises of significant proportions for the globe, and especially the majority, its poor women and children. The globe today faces interrelated crises of a global economic crisis and its systemic failures, and ecological and geopolitical crisis. In the immediate aftermath of the end of the defeat of Hitler's Nazi Germany, the United States military dominance and hegemony took off in a big way, as it has been alluded, as it began to provide significant military supplies and other assistance to its allies by 1940, even though it did not enter the war until 1941. Much of this aid was to the United Kingdom and other nations already at war with Germany and Japan through what it called Lend-Lease program. This allowed it to build up its military and consolidate the military-industrial complex in the US. This also allowed the US, This also allowed the US over the years to become the leading and strongest military nation on the globe, and with such, a politics of hegemony and unilateralism. Throughout this period, US imperialism was able to dominate and compel the globe towards a unilateral global outlook through its military coercion and its long history of wars against the globe, which has resulted in destructions of infrastructure, hunger, poverty, and total subjugation of large parts of the globe in what the US politician came to call democracy. With the decline of the US economic capabilities and the rise of other nations across the globe, and the financial economic crisis of 2008, 2009 in particular, the US began to consider a change of tack, which was imperative since, amongst others, the decolonization period, the massive popular uprising of peoples across the globe that propelled the globe to take a closer look at the agendas of the US. The heavy losses it suffered in wars such as in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and in an earlier period, especially in Latin America, the US resorted to a hybrid war of propping up dictators, stirring instability, delegitimizing of elected leaders, color revolution, and the brutal assassination of popular leaders who were articulating different trajectory of development for their countries and peoples. The hybrid war was also sustained through a strong public opinion manipulation project. As pointed out by Jingjing, the extensive use of social media, where journalists and editors were bought to plant and advance certain perspectives in the major stories in the world press. Today, in the context of Russia's strategic incursion into the Ukraine earlier this year, the US and imperialism finds itself in a corner, despite its best effort to try and extricate itself from the crisis. The unilateral raft of sanctions and other financial instruments seeking to punish Russia and those who don't agree with it, through Russia's consistent effort, have found a way around sanctions and financial transactions in the world. In this context, imperialism, as we have come to discover in the global south and in Africa in particular, has for long periods been trying to lure others behind its campaign under the guise of democracy and development aid. Recently, Zambia agreed to host the Strategic Intelligence Facility of the United States military on its territory, ostensibly to try and cajole Southern African region after the failure of AFRICON and a consistent principled opposition to US imperialism, including the development in the northern parts of Mozambique. In Mali, and against other ECOWAS nations in the region, the military regime there kicked out France and its so-called peacekeeping forces in its territory. The Malian military has opted to strengthen ties, trade, and other relations with Russia and Turkey. There are nominal efforts beginning to emerge across the globe, seeking to undermine the US and its allies' hegemony and unilateralism, in particular in social media and propaganda spaces. Both Russia and China have developed extensive platforms on social media and financial transactional platforms to continue to enable international exchange and trade. We in South Africa are keenly aware of revolutions. In the aftermath of the United Nations no-fly zone position, which allowed France and the UK and the US and its allies to kill Muammar Gaddafi and plunge Libya into the chaos that it is today, plunging the living standards of ordinary Libyans into the abyss. We are particularly aware and have been impacted upon in a major way when a Polish national who had migrated to our country harboring anti-communist and pro-Nazi attitudes brutally assassinated the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Comrade Chris Matlhako, in 1991. Janusz Walus, who had emigrated to South Africa earlier, harbored strong anti-communist sentiments, which we argue were cultivated during the period of Lech Walesa's Labour Party's anti-Soviet campaign in the late 80s. Confirming this orientation and supported by the United States, Walecha, among other things, said the following, I quote, "There's a need for remodeling of democracy and capitalism." And he's also reported to have said, "We have been worried that the remodeling will not get done without the substantial participation of the United States." Close quote. According to him, the growing absence of the US as a global force in recent years has left a void of ideas and leadership that populist figures in various nations have sought to fill with appeals for nostalgia and xenophobia, he is reported to have said. Indeed, this is our lived history and experience of anti-communism, neo-Nazism, racism, and fascism, which the apartheid regime also modeled itself around. He and his ilk in the conservative circles, both here and elsewhere around the globe, had wanted to plunge our country into a civil war with devastating consequences for all, so that the glimmer of freedom be dimmed and the majority of the Black population to continue to be subjugated under the yoke of colonialism of a special time. What we see taking place in the Ukraine has a similar familiarity to it. Anti-communism, neo-Nazism, racism, Russophobia. And when we recognize the impeccable role played by the Soviet people and its government in our struggles for national liberation, it is waved away and said to be nostalgia. Indeed, we are nostalgic if that means defending the national aspirations and the goals that we have achieved as a nation. We believe our best efforts to confront imperialism and its antecedent belligerence is to properly articulate in what the International Manifesto Group says, I quote, "Today, however, the struggle stands at a perilous juncture," close quote. Notwithstanding our deep and massive contradictions in the left and elsewhere in progressive circles, through pluripolarity to socialism should be our broad slogan that encompasses our anti-imperialism principle and campaign. Thank you very much, Comrade Radhika.